Today marks a huge victory for the Armenian community, considering the fact that Germany's parliament, with a striking majority, has decided to acknowledge the Armenian genocide. This is obviously a very complex and controversial issue that many major countries, including the United States, Britain, and Turkey, refuse to acknowledge. Part of the reason why Germany refused to acknowledge the Armenian genocide up until today is because of the fact that Germany was an ally to the Ottoman Empire during the time that the Armenian genocide took place. Now, as of last year, more than 20 countries around the world have officially recognized the killings of 1915 as a genocide. There are various historians who have chimed in on this topic and have also identified it as a genocide. Now, the whole debate is about whether or not this tragic massacre is actually considered a genocide. Did the Turks want to wipe off an entire population of Armenian people from the face of the planet? And when you think about the actions that took place during the genocide, I think the answer is pretty clear. Now, I myself am an Armenian. My family was victimized by the brutality of the Turks during this time, and so some of you might think that I might be biased on this issue. But regardless of what you think, you can do your own research, you can look into this matter yourself, and you can see that based on the evidence that we have of 1 million to 1.5 million Armenians being murdered by the Turks during this massacre, it's pretty clear that it was a genocide. Now, the Turkish government has chimed in, and they are not happy about this because of the consequences that Turkey might have to face if there's mounting pressure for Turkey to acknowledge the genocide. For instance, Turkish leaders fear a genocide acknowledgement could lead to demands for huge reparations. In fact, Turkey has always rejected the term genocide, saying there was no systematic attempt to destroy a people. Even Turkey's foreign minister released a statement after Germany's resolution saying, "The way to close the dark passages of your own history is not by defaming the histories of other countries with irresponsible and baseless decisions. There is no shameful incident in our past that would make us bow our heads." Well, here's what the reality is. The Turkish government rounded up all the intellectual individuals within the Armenian community and slaughtered them on April 24th of 1915. To give you some exact numbers on that, they deported 235 to 270 Armenian intellectuals and community leaders from Constantinople to Ankara, and the majority of them were murdered. Armenian men were also murdered, and we have some photos of that which we will show you, but I want to warn you that these are very graphic images of the Armenian genocide. Armenian men were also murdered by either being hanged or decapitated. And then Armenian women, children, and elderly individuals were forced to go through a death march to the Syrian desert. The purpose of a death march is to ensure that these people die. Now, I want to share my personal experience with this story and why I think it's so important to share it with you. As I mentioned, my family was also victimized by this brutality. My grandfather on my father's side, my great-grandfather, I should say, on my father's side, was murdered by the Turks, and then my great-grandmother was forced to go through this death march with her children. Now, luckily, they survived because of the help of Turkish families that were against the genocide. So to make any type of generalization about all Turks during that time or Turkish people of today would be irresponsible, to say the least, because I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for Turks that helped my family. But with that said, it's also important to consider the fact that the Turkish government not only refuses to acknowledge the genocide, they refuse to even acknowledge the pain, the suffering, and the fact that the Armenian people need some closure on this issue. There are some Turks that acknowledge that, hey, yeah, there was a massacre, but they refuse to acknowledge just how bad that massacre was or what the true intentions of the Turkish people were, or the Turkish government, I should say. Another thing to also keep in mind is that there is a fear among some Turkish citizens of acknowledging the genocide because of the fact that Erdogan has taken some pretty drastic measures against journalists or anyone who has anything negative to say about Turkey or about his leadership. So I understand the fears there, but it's also important for countries like the United States to take a stand and acknowledge the genocide. The reason why Britain and the United States refuse to do so is because of our ties to Turkey. They are allies of our country, and so as a result, they're willing to deny a very clear event that occurred a century ago, which is deplorable to say the least. Now, here's some more of Turkey's response to this. Germany's resolution is likely to place a strain on relations between Berlin and Ankara and follows a recent migrant deal between Turkey and the European Union in which Germany plays a central role. Also, another thing to keep in mind is that when other European countries decided to acknowledge the genocide, there was some retaliation by the Turkish government. France is an example of that. According to CNN, when France passed legislation recognizing the Armenian genocide in 2011, Turkey promptly recalled its ambassador to the country and froze military cooperation between the countries. Again, here's another reason why both Britain and the United States refuse to acknowledge the genocide. They don't want to deal with this type of retaliation. But I would argue that it's more important to be principled and acknowledge something that's just as bad as the Holocaust than to just be concerned about your international relations so you can continue on with perpetual war in the Middle East. Finally, in April, Pope Francis referred to the massacre as the first genocide of the 20th century, a claim which Turkish President Erdogan described as nonsense, recalling his country's ambassador to the Vatican. And I understand that we have Turkish fans, Turkish viewers who might disagree with this. And I also understand that these are individuals who have dealt with decades of propaganda or they fear any type of retaliation from their own government. I just want you to understand what the Armenian people went through, the numbers of people that were starved to death, that were forced to march through that desert, or were killed in some of the most brutal ways imaginable. They deserve to be acknowledged. They deserve to at least get some sort of apology from the Turkish government and also from the US government from refusing to acknowledge it. My father was born in Damascus, Syria. He wasn't born in Damascus because his family decided they wanted to move to Syria. They were forced to move to Syria because my great-grandmother went through that death march with her children and later settled in Syria. This is a real issue that impacts many Armenians that are living today. The fact that we're not getting the acknowledgement we need is absolutely disgusting. And that's my final judgment.